So when I was looking at the lectionary and I saw that this particular gospel was next in the docket, I was pretty excited actually. So Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, the story of the calling of St. Peter. And I love this story for a couple of reasons. First of all, because St. Peter is probably my favorite saint in the Catholic tradition, but also because this particular gospel, in a way which is kind of unexpected, is immensely practical in terms of showing how the cross actually brings about healing and redemption in real time. So in a certain sense, the most important key to kind of understand a story is to kind of grasp the context, right? So obviously the story is about Peter, and he's a fisherman. And what you hear is that Peter has been fishing all night, and he's caught nothing. St. Peter has been fishing all night, and he's caught nothing. It speaks to the fact that all of us have a tendency to tie our sense of self-worth and value and identity to our productivity, our ability to produce that which the world finds to be important and valuable. Insofar as I can produce things which the world finds to be important and valuable, I am a valuable person, I have self-worth. Insofar as I can't, not so much. And more to the point, you got to recognize that everyone has their thing. Some variation of wealth, pleasure, power, and honor, the classical substitutes for the reality of God. This thing around which I build my entire life and sense of self. So, what's Peter's thing? It's pretty easy to guess. Peter's thing is fish. Sounds kind of strange, but this happens all the time, right? We build our sense of self and identity around lesser things, which, when exposed, seem kind of silly. So again, his thing is fish. So for the longest time, he's thinking, gosh, if I have more fish, I'm more of a man. If I have less fish, I'm less of a man. If I catch no fish, if I fished all night and caught nothing, what does that mean for me? I am worthless. I am worth nothing. So he begins a story heavily steeped in shame and self-hatred. And all he wants to do is go home and wallow in self-pity, to distract himself, to numb his emotional pain. Drink beer, eat chips, right? Again, that's the beginning of the story. And that's when Jesus comes. It's the Gospel of Luke chapter 5, but already Jesus Christ, his fame has spread. And so people have come from far and wide, from their villages and towns, to be with the Lord, to linger in his presence, to listen to him preach. And so they're basically crushing in on the Lord. That's what we hear in the gospel. And so the Lord has a plan. I know, I'll get in a boat and I'll push away from the shore to prevent these people from crushing in on me, but also to make sure that we have better sight lines. So, of course, he gets into St. Peter's boat without permission. Now, St. Peter, at this point, he's thinking, kill me now. I remember talking about this particular gospel with the kids at the school, and I came to this particular part of the story. So, boys and girls, Peter wants to tell Jesus to get lost, but he doesn't. And why is that? And they're like, because he's Jesus. Well, wrong. I think the reason why he doesn't say that is because he's thinking about the crowd. So if I tell Jesus off in front of the crowd, I'm going to look like a jerk in front of the crowd. My sense of value and identity is based on public opinion, so I can't look like a jerk in front of the crowd. So, sure, Lord, you can use my boat. They both get into the boat, they push away from the shore. And Jesus Christ gives a sermon. Now, the gospel doesn't say whether it's a short sermon or a long sermon, so you have to guess. Again, I remember once bringing this to kids in the school. Boys and girls, you think Jesus gives a short sermon or a long sermon? And they say long sermon. And why? Because he's Jesus. It's like, is that your answer to everything? Begin to wonder. Anyways, I think they're right, but not for the reason they give. It's not because he's Jesus. I think Jesus Christ gives a long sermon in that circumstance because of the crowd. Again, they come far and wide to be with him, and so he wants to teach them many things. So, I don't know if you ever sat through a long sermon before. Insert joke here. But it can be challenging, right? So at the end of this long sermon, Peter's thinking, okay, surely he's going to let me go. And then what happens, of course, Jesus says, let's go fishing. Now before, Peter's like, kill me now. Now he's like, I kind of want to kill you. But again, he doesn't tell Jesus to get lost because, again, of the crowd. And so they go fishing. And they catch all this fish. So much fish, it's bursting the nets at the seams. Peter's got to call his friends, his buddies, to help bring the fish to the shore, and they do that, and all of a sudden he's overwhelmed. And he falls to Jesus' knees. Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. And the Lord says, do not be afraid. From now on you'll be fishers of men. And then they leave behind their nets, the fish, their old lives, in search of I know not what. I just know that I'm called to be with this guy. And so together we go on this great adventure. And after that, of course, St. Peter becomes this great saint, the first pope, this great witness and leader in the church. This story is really instructive in terms of what it shows us as to how the cross actually brings about healing and redemption in real time, beginning right now. So think about how the cross exposes the wounds in St. Peter's heart. Think about how the cross in the story exposes the thing that was always there in terms of Peter's wounds and frailties and insecurities, but only now are being brought to light by the power of the Holy Spirit, right? In a certain sense, Jesus Christ comes to St. Peter at the wrong time. I hate myself. I'm wallowing in shame and self-pity. I just want to go home. But of course, it's actually the right time. And then when Jesus enters St. Peter's life, what happens? So I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling tired, I'm confused, whatever. When Jesus Christ comes, these things don't just leave, they become more intensified. Now Christ is in my life and I feel more confused, more stressed, more off-put. But Christ is using all these things to bring things to the surface, because the Lord knows the human heart. We are deathly afraid, like all the time, especially when it comes to facing those things that we don't want to face. And so what does the Lord do? He permits difficult and challenging circumstances, difficult and challenging people perhaps, to bring to the surface these things we would otherwise not look at. He does these things to force us to look at these wounded areas in our hearts, because, of course, that's an important prerequisite to healing. If I want to be healed, first of all, I need to know what my wounds actually are. Now, the other thing, the cross actually brings about healing itself. So in this regard, it's important to kind of imagine an alternate reality. So imagine it's the same gospel, but in this case, there is no Jesus, and there is no crowd. The same outcome in terms of like catching a lot of fish. And so the question is, what would St. Peter have done after catching so much fish? Again, sometimes I put this question to the boys and girls at the school with fear and trembling. And they say, well, he would give the fish to the poor. I'm like, no, he would not. Maybe like one fish and eat some, but sell the rest. Make a ton of money, go home and be like, wow, that was an awesome day. And I am awesome. Look how much fish I caught. Again, more fish, more man. And so no change, but also more heavily steeped in this false sense of identity based on the accumulation of fish. But now you go back to the actual story. With Jesus and with the crowd, he walks away from more fish than he's ever caught in his entire life. And I want you to sit in that. That's no small thing. Everyone has their thing, right? Peter's thing is fish. And he walks away from his thing to follow the Lord, again, in search of I know not what. That's an amazing and incredible thing. So it's very important for us to kind of flag that. How did that transformation come about? Because certainly he didn't begin his day looking to become detached from material things. And yet it happened in spite of himself. It's not because he read a book. Sometimes we have this romantic idea that the way to grow in a spiritual life is to read books and learn about virtue and apply things in our life and develop habits and go from there, right? There is something to that, but a lot of times if you think about it, what actually brings about deep change in your heart is the crucible of life. So you look back at yourself like a year ago, comparing that past self to your current self, you might realize, well, gosh, I'm actually kind of different. And if you ask yourself, like, how did those changes come about? It wasn't because you thought your way to transformation. Probably what happened is that you went through, again, the crucible of life. I was trying my best to go God's way. I was trying to be faithful to do the moment. Where does God want me to be? What does he want me to do? Focusing on a few things he wants me to do carefully and well. And somehow through all these things, not just the things I was doing, but the things happening to me, I was growing and stretching and changing in a way which defies comprehension. And the whole time I was thinking, like, what the heck is going on? But again, you realize, in retrospect, it had nothing to do with intellectual mastery. Most of the time, you'll have no clue what's going on. But you gotta trust that somehow through all this, he is working things to the good for those who love him. The example that comes to mind, just to kind of drive this point home. Lately, I find I've been talking about my mom a lot, but there's a reason why. So my mom, I've learned a lot from my mom in terms of what she loves, but also from what she hates. And if you've met my mom and if you talk to her for any length of time, one thing she hates it when people are being weak. That's actually the wrong way to put it. She hates it when people are being pathetic. It drives her crazy. And just to frame it, it's not like she lacks compassion. The idea is like when you give into fear and self-pity and just a sense of like, I'm giving up on life, she hates that so much. And she will fight you on it. And if you try to fight back, good luck to you. You will lose. And it's amazing. It's always been amazing for me to have someone like that in my life because I can think about moments where I'm starting to feel sorry for myself, and my mom will give me like 2 seconds, and then she'll fight me, and I will lose. And what she's kind of saying implicitly is like, look, there will always be fear. There will always be the fear of suffering, the fear of what could happen, the fear of things yet to come. But you got to recognize that, gosh, it's not simply a matter of waiting for a time where I'm not afraid, where there's no challenges or difficulties. You got to recognize that there's something greater than fear. There's the mission, there's the call to discipleship, and there's the Lord our God. So what are we doing? Don't waste any time feeling pathetic or feeling fear, because there's something greater than fear. Think about, the Garden of Gethsemane. Here's Jesus Christ. He's on his hands and knees, and he's like sweating blood, right? This is before the crucifixion. My soul is sorrowful unto death. I feel like killing myself, right? Also, Lord, if possible, let this cup pass from me. In other words, there has to be another way. There has to be another way to bring salvation to the world. And he says this over and over again. There has to be another way. There has to be another way. There's this non-Catholic Christian speaker who talks about this particular episode in the gospel, when she says, in that moment, God the Father doesn't say to Christ, Jesus, we talked about this. What the Father says to Jesus in that moment is, I wish there was another way, but there is not. I want to be clear about this point. There's a way to live the Christian faith where you're on the periphery. That's why it's a really common thing to think about the Catholic faith in terms of like reading books. It's important to have Catholic education, but at the same time, it's not simply about living on the periphery and thinking about the Catholic faith in abstract terms. You gotta be tough. And this is the lesson St. Peter has to learn, right? So I want to be happy. I want to be this great leader and witness in the church. You know how that happens? It's through the cross. And so I know you begin the story feeling sad and feeling stress and feeling confusion. But when you invite the Lord in your life, those things become more intense, not because the Lord's a masochist, but because this is the only way. And wherever you're inclined to give into fear, first of all, don't. But recognize this is the way always of the gospel. Perhaps, probably, the Lord is walking me along the same path as St. Peter for me to become great and the leader and a great witness of the Christian thing, not just for me, but for the world.